Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. We are live. I am the creative Contessa. Welcome to my medieval sewing party. Yeah, okay, actually, I think we just went live. Okay, I'll try that again. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to my medieval sewing party. I am the creative Contessa, and today we will be continuing to work on repairs on garments that I have been wearing very heavily over the last lots of years, while I talk about a variety of topics of medieval history, and especially daily life in the Middle Ages. So as always, we will start with the traditional getting dressed with which I usually start these parties. So if you have any questions or comments, as always, just drop them in the live chat. If you are watching on Facebook, I can sometimes see your live chat comments and sometimes I can't. So I won't be ignoring you. It's just that sometimes the powers that be decide I'm not allowed to see what it is you want to say to me. So everyone, how is everyone doing? Spring is almost here. We are currently in Daegu, South Korea, and the plum blossoms have already started blooming, so I'm so excited for a beautiful spring season. Today, I shall be dressing in the 15th century Burgundian, French, Flemish, English style. To wit, I'm starting in my smock, as it would be called in 15th century English. This is the linen undergarment that is worn directly against your skin. On my YouTube channel and in fact on my Facebook, I have numerous videos that talk about the importance of this linen layer, right? It is made using a technique called geometric construction, which means that it consists of a variety of squares and rectangles and triangles, right? So it's basically a rectilinear puzzle, right? But that does not make it simpler to put together, actually, than more modernly tailored garments with curved arms, eyes, and whatnot. In fact, geometric construction is less forgiving than modern tailoring techniques are, because if the shapes don't fit together perfectly, then you actually will end up with fabric sticking out, and there's no easing in that case. So yeah, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. So over top of this goes a garment called a kirtle, kirtle, a coat simple in French, a gamora in Italian, right? And this is the next layer. This is an intermediate layer though. My kirtle is made of wool. We're still in wool season here. Kirtles could be made of silk, however, in the upper crust. I have read countless inventories of noble women and queens and regnant duchesses, and they all have kirtles in very, very splendid fabrics. And by splendid fabrics, I mean silk damask. I mean cloth of gold. So even though this was the layer that went over top of your underwear and is in essence an underlayer in and of itself, conspicuous consumption is not a new concept. And so queens and duchesses regnant and princesses and empresses would have their kirtles made out of very fine stuff. Not all of them. They do have some kirtles made out of wool and simpler silk, but there are, for example, specifically, I'm thinking Queen Margaret of Denmark, Queen of Scotland, the Queen of James III of Scotland. She had numerous kirtles that are made out of cloth of gold and velvet and silk satin and all kinds of very splendid fabrics. So that's next on my things to make list, is to make a very fine kirtle out of some of the silk damask and silk velvet that I in fact have in my fabric stores. Yeah. Love wool, the best material humans have come across. Now, wool is fantastic. Wool is wonderful in so many ways. Wool is naturally antimicrobial. Wool is flexible and has a kind of natural elasticity to it. And I'm talking about the fibers, not just the fabric itself. It breathes well in hot and humid conditions. It keeps you warm when it's cold. It keeps you not from overheating actually when it's hot. And I have tested wool garments in tropical countries like Thailand in the height of their hot and humid season, and it was still just as comfortable as anything else. So yeah, anyone who says, "Oh, wool is so hot, I can't wear it in a hot and humid place," it's because you're wearing the wrong weave of wool. There are different weaves of wool. Not all weaves of wool are created equally. Some wool is woven loosely, summer weight wools, for instance, and they are not fulled to the point where they become almost impenetrable by moisture and air. They breathe really, really well. So if you live in a hot and humid place, you can absolutely still make your medieval garments out of wool. You just have to get the right weave of wool. Don't get coat wool. Don't get wool that has been fulled and boiled until it's basically dense enough to protect you against a hurricane. Don't get that. That is not going to breathe very well in a hot and humid climate. But summer weight wool, perfect. Just perfect. And I think that's the problem. A lot of modern people are so divorced from natural fibers that they don't realize the benefits of not just the benefits, but the properties of natural fibers like wool. They just assume that the wool sweaters they grew up with, that's all wool, like that's representative of all kinds, all the weaves, all the different wool fabrics that are out there, or that the wool of the coats that they grew up with, because most coats aren't made out of wool anymore, they're made out of petrochemicals that will become microplastics, give you, all kinds of inflammatory diseases and become a major pollution burden on our planet, rather than wool, which will eventually biodegrade. One of the reasons also that we don't have as many extant garments from the Middle Ages as we would like, because wool does biodegrade, actually. Okay. Let me see comments. So much more flattering and demure than the overstretched attire of our modern sized ladies. Yeah, wool gauze. Yeah, exactly. Twitchy mentions wool gauze. You can absolutely get wool gauze. You can get wool gauze. Wool can be woven in pretty much any kind of weave. And I'd like to point out that satin is not a fiber, satin is a weave. So there is such a thing as wool satin, cotton satin, silk satin, synthetic satin. I haven't seen linen satin, but I bet Rami could be woven in a satin. I mean, so satin is a weave, right? So you could absolutely weave linen in a satin weave. I just don't know if it would, I don't know what it would look like. If it could, it should be able to have that shine because you can polish linen, by the way. So taffeta is a weave, velvet is a weave, tabby is a weave, twill is a weave, herringbone is a weave. None of those are inherently tied to any given fiber. So I have actually seen in medieval records evidence of wool velvet, for instance, which is not, it's not very common, but it would be less expensive than silk velvet would be. And silk velvet would have been the velvet, basically, more or less, the go-to. Silk would have been the go-to fiber for velvet in the Middle Ages. Okay, so I've just laced up my gown. Now let's do something about my hair. Now I've been experimenting with some of the reproduction recipes from Cosmetica Obscura, specifically for hair. So last night before we braided my hair for bed, we combed through some of their 1561 reproduction hair oil. And it still smells so nice. My plan is actually to eventually, of course, sometime today, to actually wash it out and see how that might condition my hair. But you are now seeing my hair having been in braids all night with the lovely hair oil, the botanical hair oil, as they call it. And it really just smells so lovely. So, some of you have been asking me, well, how, didn't medieval people smell bad? They did not. They did not smell bad. They didn't want to smell bad. They did everything in their power to not smell bad. And a scented hair oil or a powder made of herbs and or spices for the very wealthy, would have been a really great way to keep your hair smelling nice. And we know that across all levels of medieval society, people wanted to smell nice because contagion was thought to be carried on the back of miasma, foul-smelling air. And the way to fight contagion, logically, of course, is to not smell foul. If you smell sweet, then the contagion will be kept at bay. So, and this was general common knowledge. This wasn't just a theory that some people had at upper levels of society. So everyone wanted to smell nice as possible all the time, not just for special occasions, right? Yeah, so back to the subject of wool. Yeah, wool is great. It's fantastic. This style of garment, this kirtle, would have been the go-to interim layer, mid-layer for pretty much everyone in Flanders and France and England for most of the 15th century. There are some long-sleeved versions as well. So they did have long sleeve versions also, but the long sleeve version could not be worn with the fitted gown that should come over top of this, because by the 15 or 1460s, the gown, the style of gown that women were wearing over top of this, that fashionable ladies in France and Flanders and England were wearing over top of this, was getting very, very fitted. And the sleeves were also fitted. And so the fitted sleeves of the overgown wouldn't fit over long sleeves on the kirtle. So they, for the most part, they're wearing this short sleeve kirtle under those really beautiful gowns with the long trains that you see starting in about the 1460s. Whereas we do see women women of the artisan class or women of the merchant class, especially if they're actually doing something, we do see that they're wearing a long sleeved kirtle. Yeah. Let me see. Yeah, so wigs. So we don't necessarily. I have seen evidence of wigs being worn. Not necessarily wigs so much. Were wigs worn in the Middle Ages? Well, first off, I'm not going to make a grand sweeping statement like that. The Middle Ages is 1,000 years of history, and it covers an entire continent, and none of those things are monolithic. In ancient Rome, women wore wigs and men wore wigs. We know that for a fact, 100%. That practice doesn't seem to necessarily have carried on much past the Justinian plague in Western Europe, because 90% of Europe's population died over about a 150-year period. And so that took with it the critical mass you would need for the creation of a luxury and very specialty item such as a wig. But what we do know for a fact is that women across Western Europe, Italy, France, England as well, I've seen evidence of this, we're using fake hair. Especially to bulk out their hairstyles for headdresses, so that there would actually be enough hair to support these headdresses that you're seeing. And in Italy, they were doing the same thing. They were bulking out their braids and also their fringe so that they would have really pretty fringe, right? So we do know that fake hair is definitely a thing. The earliest evidence I have of fake hair that's documentary evidence is 14th century. I haven't looked back further than that, though. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I just haven't done a deep dive on, say, 12th century practices. But it wouldn't surprise me, thinking about the depictions of women with these really crazy long braids, like down to their knees, really thick braids wrapped in casing and ribbon from the 12th century. It wouldn't surprise me if they weren't using fake hair as well. So, I guess it depends on how you define a wig, right? Hair pieces, yeah, documentable for various parts of medieval Europe in various, kind of discrete different eras. Full out wigs, yeah, not necessarily so much. Although I do believe there are records of Elizabeth I having had wigs. I think that Elizabeth I did in fact have some wigs. I remember reading that, I think, in one of Janet Arnold's books. Yeah. But fake hair, absolutely a thing. And in fact, there were sumptuary laws governing fake hair, saying sumptuary laws are laws that govern luxury items. And so there were sumptuary laws that actually regulated who could wear what kind of fake hair. There's one from Bologna specifically that states that servant women may not have fake hair that is made of silk. And may not have fake hair that is real hair, right? They are allowed to have fake hair that is made of wool, wool yarn, basically. So how fun is that? Which gives us a hint of the other materials that are possible. Clearly, real hair extensions and hair pieces were a thing, but also you could also make them out of silk. So if you wanted to make your own 14th or 15th century or even 16th century hair pieces, to augment the hair that you have, if it's not long enough or not thick enough for the things you're doing, then you could actually go and get some silk yarn or some wool yarn and make yourself up in a color that sort of matches your hair, and make yourself up some hair pieces without having to have real hair or the skills of a really fancy wig maker. Yeah. Let me see. I had a girl offer me $500 for my ponytail. I asked her what she was going to do with it, and she said she would be going to make a weave out of it and wear it herself. I said, no, thanks. I'll keep my hair. Jim, yeah. Actually, there is a big industry for hair pieces and weaves and whatnot, and wigs. Actually, full out wigs, especially for cancer patients, people who are going through chemotherapy treatment. That's redundant. Chemotherapy. Okay. Yeah, so hair pieces are absolutely a thing, and I am seriously thinking about actually adding. I know my hair looks really fluffy, and it is right now, but it is actually not that thick. I don't have a lot of. I was not blessed with a thick head of hair, sadly, and nor was I blessed with the ability to grow hair really, really long. This is kind of it for me. This is the longest my hair has ever been, and as longest it will probably ever be, unless my DNA changes or my phenotype somehow changes. But I have been thinking seriously about making myself some extensions or thickeners, hair pieces, specifically so that, before I do this braid, I'll show you what it is I want to do. Specifically so that I can actually make a bun here, a big bun on the crown of my head that is braided into my hair, and not like a whole piece that's separate, but that's actually braided into my hair, so that I can have a really big bun here. Because I have a theory, my current theory about those conical headdresses, the not a hennin, that we call the princess hat, right? My current theory is that one of the ways that they were secured to the head is that these ladies just had really thick hair. They had long hair, they had a lot of hair, and they would make a bun right here on their head, and the cone would actually slip over that, and you could pin the cone to the bun, and it would absolutely stay really, really well then, right? So to do that, I need to have a lot more hair than I have, because when I make my hair into a bun, it's this little tiny tennis ball or a racquetball, maybe not even a tennis ball, a racquetball ball. So that means that I will need to have a lot more hair. So I'm thinking of getting some silk yarn and braiding it into some really thick braids that can then be, worked into my own hair. And then we can make a big bun right here on the back of my head, and maybe even sew the bun into place with some kind of taping method. And then the cone will then sit on the bun really, really securely. Yeah. Twitchy, that's awesome. You donated your hair to, for kids who've suffered from hair loss. That's really generous. I will never, ever have enough hair to do that. Ever. Never, 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 never. And my hair grows really slowly, because I'm pretty certain that my hair basically stops growing after 2 years. Each of the follicles, they stop growing after 2 years. They go into the rest phase, and then they fall out. People who can grow their hair really long, it's because your hair actually, depending on your genetics, and sometimes your environment, but more your genetics. There's people who have really long hair. Their hair follicles have a long growing phase. It can be anywhere from 2 to 10 years. I'm on the 2-year phase, more or less. People who have really long hair have follicles that'll grow for 10 years before stopping and resting and then falling out eventually. That's not me. So it takes me forever to grow my hair out. Forever. Okay. My hair grows so long and very rapidly. It's also very thick and fine, so perfect for wigs. Yep. I have my best friend. She could literally be a personal hair factory, a one-person hair factory. When I met her, she had hair down to the backs of her knees. And she only later in life, what the hell? Oh dear. She only later in life actually decided to cut it and keep it short and start styling it. But until she was, after she graduated college, she would regularly cut her large lengths of her hair off and donate it, and it would make hardly any difference because she had hair down to the backs of her knees, and she's 5'10", so she's tall. So that's a lot of hair. And it was very thick, and the hair can really take a lot of abuse. It was, though, it doesn't have any kind of body on its own. It's just, it was this straight, thick column of hair. But yeah, if she actually wanted to do any of these medieval or Renaissance styles, she'd have plenty of hair for it. Plenty. But now she's cut it all off, basically. Occasionally she grows it out and donates it again. Yeah. May I ask, Rachel, what did you just braid into your hair? Oh, that's a great question, Jim. So this is finger loop braiding, basically. And it's a lace, as we call them. It's a lace, and that's how I secure my hair all the time for everything. Not just basically, it's a way to not have to use elastics or microplastics or anything like that. But the best part is that because it is braided into the braid, starting at about here, it's really secure. It won't just fall out, right? What's the big problem with elastics? They come out, they fall out eventually, especially if you are active in any kind of real way, and I'm pretty active. So yeah, this is a great way to secure your hair. Now, do I have evidence that they braided laces into their hair this way and secured it? Not really. I don't have evidence that they didn't, but I don't have evidence that they did. This is just something a technique I've developed over the years. We do know that women did hair taping, and where basically you arrange the hair in some constellation, and then you take ribbon and you actually sew your hair into that pattern. And I have several videos demonstrating hair taping techniques on my YouTube channel. If you look up hair taping, you'll see lots of demonstrations. But actually securing braids this way, no, I don't really have evidence of that. It works for me, and it works for just making regular old braids. I don't have evidence of anything else either. Like, there's very little visual evidence of women's hair from before 1500. You very rarely see women's hair. You see them, they have headdresses on. Sometimes you might see the front, like a little bit exposed in the front and some fringe, but we don't very often see women's hair in the medieval period, because it's usually covered, and it's usually depicted as being covered, or even when they're in the bathtub, they're wearing a kerchief like I'm about to put on right now. So we just don't know. In a lot of ways, there's a lot of conjecture about how women did their hair, about the equipment they used, about the methods they used to secure it. There's lots of conjecture about how they secured their hair. Bobby pins, like we understand them, the hairpins that are really narrow. Basically you take a wire, bend it in half, and it has a lot of tension, so it holds together. Those kinds of pins didn't exist. The U pins, I have seen U pins, but they're open. It's an open U. And the U, it's like a U-shaped pin, like this, basically, right? It's kind of shaped like that, but they're not tight. They're not tight at all. They will only work in really thick hair. And they don't work in my hair. They fall right out. So they don't have those kinds of pins. I've seen depictions of one portrait from 15th century Italy, early 15th century Italy, in which, because the Italians started exposing their hair long before anyone else in Europe did. And I think that ties into chimneys that were invented basically in the Mediterranean and spread northward. But anyway, women started exposing their hair and their hairstyles much earlier in Italy than they did in the rest of Europe. And so there's this portrait from the early 15th century that depicts this woman in typical profile, right? And her hair has been done in some kind of twist. It's not really a braid, it's more like a twist. And it's been bound in ribbon. And then you can actually see pins, regular straight pins. I don't have any here with me at the moment. Regular medieval straight pins, just kind of holding, it seems to be maybe holding her braids, her twists in place, maybe. I've tried this. Those pins fall right out of my hair too. And at about $1.50 a pin, that's really expensive to just shed them. So I mean, clearly it's very interesting that this artist took the time to depict these pins in the lady's hair. It's a very interesting eye for detail. It doesn't work for my hair. Definitely does not work for my hair. So, there's a lot of conjecture about how hair was secured, how it was styled, what kinds of tools were used. Recently we've had some discussions about hair curling, how authentic medieval methods of getting hair to curl. There's also been a debate about what is medieval and what is Renaissance. I'm not going to get into that at the moment. Um, but there's just there isn't there isn't one source that's going to give you all the answers. So to find the answers to those kinds of questions, you have to examine this wide array of sources. You have to look at art, you have to look at archaeology, you have to look at the documentary evidence. There's just so many different sources that we have to use in order to piece together a picture. And the picture that we've got thus far isn't complete. It's not complete. There's still some conjecture. And one of the pieces of conjecture is actually that ladies were using the one I've heard lately, and people keep pushing this, and I keep having to push back, is that ladies were using a flaxseed gel. Now, flaxseed absolutely makes a natural gel, and it's absolutely possible that ladies could have made a gel from flaxseed in places where you could get flaxseed. Obviously. I just haven't seen any evidence of it, right? It's a conjecture. I haven't seen evidence, and we do have manuscripts that do detail styling applications for hair, and I've never seen flaxseed gel mentioned in any of them. So, I when there is evidence, I prefer to go where the evidence takes me. In the absence of evidence, then I'm happy to conjecture. But there is evidence for hairstyling techniques, and flaxseed gel just isn't one of them. But if you have seen a primary source only, please, not someone else's blog. If you have seen a primary source that is evidence of flaxseed gel having been used in hair as a for example a pomade or a hair gel, right, to hold a style, let me know. That would be very interesting. Honestly, I want to get in the habit of wearing a coif or kerchief if I ever want to grow my hair again. However, the delights that is the Mastel syndrome means I actually react to my own hair. Oh God, that's terrible. Jesus, Twitchy. I wonder if they coated them in stickier substance like a soft wax or a pomade. If they coated, you wonder if they coated what, Twitchy? You mean hair or, oh wait, do you mean the pins? The pins. Now that is an interesting idea. If you coat a pin in wax, right? If you wax the pin, basically, like you just drag the pin through a thing of beeswax. I wonder what that would do. I might be willing to experiment with one pin and see how long it stays, because those reproduction medieval pins are really expensive. But that is a very interesting idea. I like that. Yeah, that is a very interesting. And see, that's where conjecture can come in, right? When we have this visual evidence of these pins, just in some cases sticking out pretty far from this lady's hair, you wonder to yourself, how does it stay? I haven't found any documentary evidence of how it might have stayed. Then I'm happy to conjecture. In this case, I think the wax is not necessarily a bad idea, actually. Very interesting. Okay. Well, I am dressed enough for our medieval sewing party. To it, I'm wearing my kirtle, and I'm wearing a smock, and I'm wearing a kerchief. As far as we know, this was not called a coif in the Middle Ages. It seems that a coif was very specifically the skull cap shaped thing, and it seems mostly to have been worn by men. By the 15th century, at any rate, there's like almost no references to coifs for women. It's all kerchiefs, all couvre-chefs, cover chiefs, cut-chefs. There's at least 20 different spellings, thanks to the creativity that was orthography in Middle English. Yeah, I've heard of people using aloe vera juice in their hair. Yep, but aloe vera is not an old world plant. Aloe vera is a new world plant, and it was is at least at least I don't have any evidence of aloe vera in being used in any kind of way in the medieval world, in medieval Europe rather, because obviously the world was all there in the Middle Ages. I'm pretty certain aloe vera is a new world plant. Yeah. Yep. Okay, let's go ahead and get sewing. Are there any questions about anything I'm wearing before we get to the sewing party part of this party? Yeah, there has been some very interesting discussions happening lately as a consequence of some of the recent videos I've put out about medieval kilts, kilts in the Middle Ages, Scottish kilts specifically, and also medieval women's underwear, the perpetual and endless argument, right? And I just wanted to address some of the things that we do know about medieval women and underwear. I'll just check for any final comments. Okay, great. By the way, if you're enjoying this, don't forget to double tap that screen and consider subscribing. Oh, crap. Ryan, if you're watching, if you're watching, you need to go adjust the settings for this live stream the way I've shown you to do. Hopefully he's still there. He slept really, really late today. I was hoping he would get some cleaning done while I was live streaming, but apparently not. So if you're out there, please, please adjust the settings for this live stream. I did not do that. Yeah. So, medieval women's underwear, and by which I mean underpants, because obviously this linen shirt is underwear. And in fact, this kirtle in a certain way counts as underwear because it is worn under another layer. I'm not going to put that layer on because the ones I own are way too big for the apartment that we rent when we're in Daegu in South Korea. So, but because I am having an intimate little sewing circle basically in my private apartments, I consider it perfectly acceptable to dress like this. I, as a countess, can choose to dress in this manner and invite you into the privacy of my apartments for our little party. I'm not going out and doing anything in my official capacity as a contessa dressed like this. And, one thing that 15th century aristocrats loved doing was cosplaying. The idea of cosplaying is not new, dates back to at least ancient Rome and possibly ancient Persia as well. I don't know if ancient Chinese or the ancient Koreans were also into cosplay, but in Europe, yeah, cosplay's been a thing for centuries, not a new concept. The ancient Romans loved to cosplay the battles that they had won or their great victories, their great moments of triumph. They loved to cosplay um, mythical and mythical scenes from mythology, basically. They really enjoyed that. And that whole idea of, dressing up and pretending to be someone you're not new. It's funny. We used to just call it playing dress up when I was growing up, but now it's got an official word, cosplay. Um, and 15th century people were also into cosplay. Actually, 14th century people in Europe were into cosplay. Edward III was famous for cosplaying Arthur and having his knights and their ladies also cosplay knights and ladies from the Arthurian legends. So yeah, cosplaying is absolutely a thing, and I would bet you dollars to donuts that the aristocrats also enjoyed cosplaying peasants, especially in the Maying, when it's May Day, when it's the May season of the Maying, which is coming up actually pretty quickly. So yeah, here I am cosplaying a peasant, basically. Let's see. Wearing the new smock, and oh boy, I'm so happy to have it back again. I need to make at least 2 more just for daily sleepwear. Yeah, I love smocks. They're so comfortable. They really are. So women's underwear. I don't know why. There are some reenactors, some even fashion historians who seem to have developed it as an article of faith that medieval women, um, you know, never wore underpants. I don't know why. I have no idea. I have no idea why that is a concept. It's I think for a while they didn't see evidence for it, and so in the absence of evidence, they took that as evidence of absence. And I'm oppositional defiant, and so when someone tells me in a tone of absolute um, chauvinism that something did or did not happen absolutely, my oppositional defiant nature makes me go and look for evidence to refute that. And so I started this quest years ago, looking for reliable evidence of women having worn underpants in at least some parts of medieval Europe. And I found it. I found it. I found lots of it. I did a whole 32-minute video on this topic. And I've actually had people go and watch that video and decide that wedding trousseaux that detail bringing brand new pairs and old pairs of panties with the bride does not count as evidence of them having worn them, because apparently a new bride is just going to have some old underpants that she didn't wear, so I'm not certain how they're old, and new ones, and she's not going to wear them. um, I have linguistic evidence. For instance, there are people don't realize this, but bilingual dictionaries are also not a new invention. There were bilingual dictionaries in the Middle Ages. There were, for instance, there's a Latin-French dictionary called the Catholicon, and I think it dates back to the 13th century, but it kind of gets updated. In the 13th century edition of the Catholicon, and then the 14th century as well, there is an entry for a word that means, the French translation is female underpants, bras de femme, right? Female underpants. There's a word in Latin, one word in Latin that means bras de femme. Why would there be a word in Latin and that they need to translate into French if women didn't have underpants in France? And why? Because you wouldn't have, why? You wouldn't, if it doesn't exist, then you don't need a word to actually describe it, right? I have wills where I discussed this last week, where, braise, underpants, breeches are being bequeathed from a man to a woman, from a monk to his niece. There's, if she wasn't going to wear them, he could have just given them to one of his fellow brothers, or donated them to the hospital to be used for the poor, right? But no, he bequeaths them to his niece. I have so many trousseaux from 14th and 15th century Italy, wedding trousseaux that include underpants, panties, braids, breeches, mudande, right? Detail them. And there's one, like I said, that she actually brings old pairs with her and new pairs. And someone tried to tell me, oh, she's bringing them for her husband. I'm like, this is her trousseau. These are the things that are hers for her use. That's what a trousseau is, right? That's so that she is not an economic burden on the family into which she's marrying. That's the point of a wedding trousseau, of a dowry. And why in God's name, even if she was, which she definitely isn't, but even if she were, bringing those underpants, those breeches for her husband, why would she bring him old pairs? I mean, this is a woman who is upper middle class in Florence. She's not going to bring old pairs of breeches for her husband. That would be disgusting and completely unnecessary. The other thing is that in numerous household inventories and because in Florence, when you had to pay your taxes, they would actually assess the belongings in your home. So they would do an inventory of every single thing of value in your home. And so these have all been, Florence has amazing archives. These records have survived. And I found so many inventories that detailed men's underpants, mudande d'uomo. If women aren't wearing them and it's only men wearing them and it's only an item of clothing for men, then you don't need to specify for men. You would just say underpants and everyone would know that they were for men because no one else but men are wearing them. Obviously, that's not true though. They needed to specify that they were men's underpants because they could have been women's underpants, right? This is the kind of evidence I found. And I included this all in this video. And at the end of this video, this bitch of a British reenactor said, and I still haven't seen any evidence for it. I could hear her sniffing. I could hear her tone in the comments she left. It was, yeah, just incredible. Let me see. I'm much more worried about men having underwear back then. I bet their ears hung low. Men also wore underpants in the Middle Ages. There's plenty of evidence of that as well, but not necessarily everywhere and all the time. So there's evidence in Ireland, 14th century Ireland specifically, late 14th century Ireland. There is evidence that men did not wear brays. They did not wear breeches. And that's from a chronicle. And I'm not saying they didn't, it's evidence. And the evidence, I'll discuss why the evidence might be suspect in a moment. But there's a chronicle written by Jean Créton, who is chronicling basically the reign of Richard II, right? And Richard II goes to Ireland at the very end of his reign in a way to try to create glory for himself and cement himself as a warrior king, the way his grandfather Edward III was, and the way his father, the Black Prince, was a warrior prince, right? He knows he needs to get some cachet in his kingdom. And so he basically goes on campaign in Ireland, and he gets the so-called Irish kings, in quotes, that's what they're referred to in the chronicle, to pay homage to him. And part of and he knights them. And part of the preparations for this, according to Jean Créton, is these kings, these 4 Irish kings, are basically brought to these lodgings in Dublin, and they are basically given new clothes. And that's typical. That's very typical that all across Europe that happens when you have a king, and one of their expressions of power is to give the people under them a new suit of clothes. Splendid clothing, by the way. And the clothing came with etiquette lessons for these Irish kings, how to behave as part of this, before the English king and as part of this knighting ceremony. And one of the things the chronicler complains about is that these Irish kings don't know how to wear the breeches. They have no idea what to do with them, and they don't have any of their own. And he has to convince them. Jean Créton is the one who's actually doing this training. He actually has to convince them to wear them at all. So that could be evidence that in those parts of Ireland from whence those kings came, one of them was the king of Tyrone, in quotes, as per the source, that in those parts of Ireland, men didn't wear breeches, they didn't wear brays, they didn't wear, trews, they didn't wear any of that. That could be evidence of that, but it could also be, it could be not entirely true, right? Whenever you read a medieval chronicle, you have to remember that chronicles are literature as well, or fiction as well. They're like a docudrama. Chronicles of the Middle Ages are the docudramas of the Middle Ages. They really are. There are events in them that are true. You can know that the battle of such and such happened, but the details surrounding the battle of such and such may or may not be real or true. And so you have to take the source into account, and you have to take the purpose of the source into account. Yes, I need tea. Yeah, fresh tea, those leaves are done. Okay. So yeah, you have to take all of that into account. And in the case of Jean Créton, he's French. He's serving Richard II, the English king, and the whole purpose of this chronicle was to show how Richard II had triumphed over the Irish. And that has to be, made evidence in so many different ways, but also that he is superior to them, right? And one of the ways in which it could be indicated that Richard II and the English peers are superior to the Irish peers is, through cultural things like clothing. And so it's kind of in their interest to portray them as being, it could be in their interest to portray the Irish kings as being barbaric in terms of not wearing the right kinds of clothes. So, that's why I say maybe it's evidence. We have evidence that maybe they didn't, but you have to take the source into account. Oh, Patrick, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. My country people can be so snobby when it comes to reenactment. Oh yeah, twitchy. My God, British reenactors. So, obviously British reenactors are not a monolith, but on the whole, British reenactors, at least you tend to have a larger percentage of vocal reenactors who are pretty damn snobby. They don't. I've lots of British friends who are reenactors, and they don't have their head shoved up their asses like that. It's just that it seems you have a larger percentage of ones who want to comment on things in that manner. Oh, my ancient ancestors, I hope they had testicular braziers. Yeah, so actually, there's a fantastic image from one of a calendar that depicts the seasons. There's many medieval calendars have survived where you have a different illustration for each month of the year. And there's one really great one that shows, I think it shows maybe January or February. It shows these peasants. It might be the very beautiful hours of John de Berry, the Très riche de Jean Duc de Berry. But don't hold me to that. It's a very famous depiction of these peasants, farmers, sitting in their cottage, basically, and the wall of the cottage has been cut away by the artist that you can see inside. They definitely had all walls. They didn't have a 3-walled home in the middle of winter, but it did this so that you can see the whole farm, but also it's happening inside the cottage at the same time. And the 3 people, 2 men and a woman, are sitting there in front of the fire in their common room with their legs splayed and their tunics trussed up, their tunics and gowns and kirtles trussed up, and none of them are wearing brays. They're all their underparts are just fully naked and exposed to the heat to try to warm themselves up. So, that's definitely not evidence of women not having worn brays, because the men in this picture are also not wearing them. I think it's because they knew that to warm things back up, you need more direct heat contact than a layer of linen sort of blocking the heat, reflecting the heat away. It's a great depiction. It's one of those. Hi, Hanson.
Had a phone call with a friend.
Okay, great. It's one of those depictions that is actually a moment in the life of. It's fantastic. I love it. It's one of my favorite depictions from the Middle Ages. It's absolutely peasants. They're not the richest peasants either. Their clothes are not in the best shape. They're not rags hanging off of them, and they're still dyed colors, but you can tell these are working people. And it looks like basically they've just been out doing, feeding the animals, doing what chores you could actually do in the winter time, and it's snowy, by the way. And now they've all come inside and they're desperately trying to warm up their nether parts. Okay, question. Got a sewing question. Do you face the colors of your linen smocks? I do. Yes, so I have done both. I'll show it. So I'll show my Kamicha smock, right, facing. And there's a facing all the way around here. That's a facing. I do face them now, especially. I used to just hem the necklines, but what I've discovered is one from the extant pieces that we have that have survived. There's a few pieces of smocks that have survived. The Langberg smocks, for instance, they have facings around the collar. And there's a really good reason to do a facing that is beyond the ease of sewing. Yeah, do you just flip it down and turn the edge up, or do you face it with a new piece? I face it with a new piece. And so the few bits that have survived from the Middle Ages also seem to have facings. And from decades of doing medieval living history, I know why they put facings in place. Because if you have a facing on the inside of your collar of this garment that sits against your skin, the facing is rubbing against your skin. It will eventually wear out. And then you just replace the facing. The facing takes the damage. The facing develops the grime that will eventually not wash away, right? We all know, you know the grime to which I'm talking. No matter how often you wash a white linen garment, the areas that actually come in direct contact with your skin, they will eventually develop a permagrime. And if you have a facing there, instead of just rolling the hem, turning the edges down in a rolled hem, you can replace the facing. And that actually preserves the fabric that is actually seen, right? So the facing that I have here actually protrudes further out than the fabric of the shell. So the facing actually comes out a little bit further than the fabric of the top fabric, the shell fabric, right? Your fashion fabric, so that it gets all that grime on it, most of the grime on it. And then I can replace the facing as it wears out. So yeah, that's what I do. I mean, I do. Oh, it's also stronger, right? The facing makes makes the neckline much stronger, and the necklines take a lot of abuse from putting them on and off over top of your head, sticking your arms in and adjusting, right? You'll actually start pulling on it, and the facing adds strength to it and prevents it from ripping. I added a face to one that's not here right now. I added facing on post factum to one of my smocks because I actually ripped it and it ripped straight down into the bodice. And so I added a facing and that reinforced the edge and also allowed me to fix that rip really nicely. Yeah. So yeah, facings all the way, baby. Facings all the way, 100%. Question, what defines a peasant? Oh, love a question like that. Peasant literally means farmer. Peasant is not a social class, it is a job description. So peasants could be wealthy, peasants could be poor, peasants could be middle class, peasants could own land. Peasant is not a synonym for serf. Serf is a specific kind of peasant who is basically beholden to the land that they work, and they don't have the freedom to move around. Peasants could be serfs, they could be free people. So yeah, peasant comes from the French paysan, which means, country person, basically. It's just a farmer. And I will admit that historians are now trying to move away from a word like peasant because it, as one very wise historian recently said in an interview about daily life for the 99% in ancient Rome, the word peasant does a lot of the thinking for us, right? You say the word, just think peasant. Close your eyes and think peasant. And what image springs to mind, right? What image springs to mind? Probably it's going to be someone in kind of raggedy clothing or dull clothing. They're probably going to be a little dirty, probably not very well educated. So the word peasant does a lot of the thinking for us, and the thinking that it's doing is not necessarily accurate. So technically, a peasant is just a farmer. And just like now, or people who work the land, right? They could be peasants could own their own land. They may be sharecropping large estates. They may be at the bottom end of the spectrum. They may be people who just do the harvesting. So that is what a peasant is. Craftsmen are not peasants. Blacksmiths are not peasants. Carpenters are not peasants. Seamstresses are not peasants, right? Now, were there peasants who could do more than just farm? Yeah, absolutely. Depending on where you were and when you are as a peasant, you may have had to have a broad range of skills in order to successfully work your farm, right? But as the Middle Ages, as Europe kind of recovers from the Justinian plague, which is actually the first plague to destroy Europe in the 6th century going into the 7th century, right? That's the Justinian plague. As we recover from that, And the centuries wear on and the population rebounds during the warming period in the sort of the high Middle Ages, right? That really great time when we're getting 2 harvests a year and, long summers, mild winters, almost no snow in most of Europe, right? When during that period, the population really grows, and so specialization happens on a massive scale. We almost go back to the level of specialization that existed in ancient Rome, if not do go back to that level of specialization. And I say maybe go back to that level of specialization just because I'm not as familiar with Roman society as I am with medieval society. So, that specialization means that you no longer have jacks of all trades, you have masters of trades. So, there are even different kinds of smiths. There's red smiths and yellow smiths and silver smiths and blacksmiths. And, they all work in different kinds of metals. And then there's different kinds of smithing in terms of the kinds of products you produce, right? In the woolworking industry, you don't have one person doing all the stages of production by the 15th century. You have at least 20 different professions involved in creating a final length of finished wool, at least 20 different professions involved. So, in the later Middle Ages, especially, peasants really mostly focused on the actual farm work itself. They would still have some skills that they might need to farm. For instance, they would know how to make fences, which is not the same as it is now. They would know how to do some, basic level architecture to build, housing for their animals. So, but blacksmiths and, all those smiths, they all had guilds, and they were all different guilds. There wasn't one smith's guild. There was a guild for each kind of smithing in many medieval European cities. And I guess I should preface that by saying not every city, in medieval Europe had guilds. Not all of them did. And, and not all towns did. You had to have a certain size in order to have a guild. You had to reach a certain population in order to have a guild. But yeah, peasants generally were not parts of guilds. I'm not going to say they never were, but that's just not, there wasn't a peasants guild. Yeah. Let me see. Just saw the face on over the flipped hem and I pretend it was there all the time. Yeah, right, exactly. Let me see. I read somewhere once that blacksmiths were very highly thought of for working with the 4 elements. Or the 5 elements. There were 5. Ether is one of them. Obviously, you couldn't work with ether. It's not a real element. But anyway, yeah, I'm not certain whether smiths. Sorry, find my snips. I'm not certain whether smiths were in fact. Whether they did in fact have a kind of high reputation for that reason. I think it depended whether, I'm not certain. I haven't read anything about sort of a mythical respect being attached to them based on, working a kind of magic in essence, considering that you take a rock and you can turn it into this beautiful finished product, like beautiful armor in the case of blacksmiths. I don't know about that so much. I haven't seen that, but it sounds reasonable. Lagrange, the Peasants Guild. We always had land, but we always had different occupations or roles other than just having a farm. Yep. When I hear a red peasant, I think of farmers of all economic types. Yeah, Susan, you've been watching my channel too much. I've trained you to think differently about peasants over the years. Oh, there's my comb. I found the comb. The gremlins didn't walk away with my other medieval comb. Yay. The gremlins have been walking away with our medieval combs. I think the gremlins in this case are probably our cats, unfortunately. Yeah, good question. Eric, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Yeah, I don't know where everyone is today. We seem to have very low viewership. I'm not certain what's gone. Oh, yeah, well, also, Susan, you do read a lot more history than the average human on the planet. So that is for certain true. Yeah, peasants, the interesting myths that float around about medieval society, that that everyone was a peasant, and that's not true either, because that discounts the large number of people who were artisans and were responsible for making all of the goods that people used in their daily lives. They were not peasants. Um, yeah, it's very interesting. Speaking of myth busting, so there was a comment. I recently put out a post with pictures of the dishes that we have made in our medieval cooking parties, and I let it off with the title "More Medieval Myth Busting." One, the algorithm really likes things that are entitled myth busting. But two, my point was in this post that medieval cuisine was, contrary to what so many people mistakenly think, medieval cuisine was delicious and sophisticated, and was the consequence, the product of very complex techniques. And it wasn't just roast meat eaten straight from the bone day after day after day. And one of my fellow reenactors commented back that he quibbled with me that I was busting a medieval myth because it was only the wealthiest who had access to the dishes that we'd been making, because only the wealthy had access to those spices. Okay, yes, I will agree that only the wealthy had access to those spices, but it's still myth busting because people still think that even the nobility and kings and queens in medieval Europe ate garbage food, ate simple food that was bland and boring, right? That is a common myth. I didn't say, nowhere in the post did I say this is how everyone ate. And I would never say that, because that would be untrue. On the other hand, we do know that even peasants, wow, this keeps wrapping back to peasants somehow. Even peasants, everyone basically had access to a massive array of wild herbs that grew everywhere that they used to flavor their pottages and dishes, right? So if they made beans, and peasants definitely had beans, if they made a bean dish, there were such an amazing variety of very flavorful, very pungent herbs that they could use to dress up that dish, and did use. Right. So just because you can't afford cubebs and grains of paradise doesn't mean you can't make an interesting dish. And the fact of the matter is that in modern Western cuisine, we use about 6 herbs, and that's it. Most of the herbs that were used regularly by the peasants in the Middle Ages are now considered weeds, and no one would consider putting them in their food. It's almost impossible to buy them. You would have to grow them yourselves or go wild harvest them if you actually knew what they looked like. So just because someone in the Middle Ages couldn't afford, just because someone in the Middle Ages could not afford expensive spices doesn't mean their food was bland and boring. Also, what is in season is going to change across the year. Seasonal eating was absolutely a thing. So the herbs that are available in March are could be, but not necessarily going to be the ones available in April, May, or June. The vegetables, the greens available to go into the pottages, the root vegetables available to go into those pottages are going to change, sometimes week to week, depending on the season. Whether you get to include meat or not, if you're a peasant who has more means, then you could actually include meat on a regular basis in your pottages. And a recent meta study just came out. I guess maybe not just, maybe about 6 months ago at this point. I just read it anyway. A meta study has been done about the diet of the average European, including peasants, because they are the majority of the population, including farmers, people working in the agricultural industry, artisans, middle-class people, the poor, even the poor in the cemeteries where the poor were buried, right? And the ones that were attached to the charitable hospitals. They've done this meta study, and what they found is that I think it was 32 kilograms of meat a year was the average meat consumption, not amongst the aristocracy, not amongst the nobility, amongst the 90% of the population. And that the average meat consumption is higher in the Middle Ages than it is in Victorian England. So, you know, this myth of the medieval, again, peasant in quotes, not having regular access to meat is also just, it's a myth. It's not true. Now, were they eating, obviously they're not eating 5 pounds a day the way your average Westerner is now. Um, but it's clearly more than nothing. So yeah, um, medieval myth busting. Peasants had a more varied diet than people think. Their dishes were tastier and more flavorful than you think. And they actually had more diversity in their diet than modern people do because they weren't suffering from a monoculture society where they only had one cultivar of they didn't have potatoes, one cultivar of turnip, one cultivar of basil, one cultivar of wheat, right? So they had a much more varied diet, which would have also led to more interesting flavors, more interesting textures. So yeah, I refute the idea also that medieval peasants had a boring diet. Sorry. I refute that absolutely using evidence. Let me see. Contessa, I just saw you on a short myth-busting medievals not wearing underpants made me laugh, and so I came to check you were live, and you are. Oz, thank you for joining. Good to see you. Did you enjoy the short? Was it the one where I go ew, 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 just ew? Was it that short? Yeah. I have a crock pot of my beans on the stove every day, comfort food. Yeah, and you know, probably there was a similar practice. Oh, poo, I did not wax this thread. Handsome, could you bring me my wax, please? Yeah. It's on the table. Uh, my silk thread is trying to knot on itself. Oh boy. Yeah, probably there was a similar practice in a lot of households where there would be, thank you, where there would be a pot of stew. That's like the perpetual pot of stew where you would just kind of, you know, add to it day by day. I've seen some evidence of that. Yeah, I know my my stepfather, God bless him, he's from Winston-Salem. My stepfather, when my mother met him, would had a pot of pinto beans on the stove, and he would just periodically add more pinto beans to it, and he would just sort of bring it to a boil every single day. He didn't put it in the fridge. It wasn't constantly warm. It wasn't a crock pot. It was a pot of pinto beans, and I mean, not canned pinto beans, ones made from dry beans, and he would just add to it, you know, every couple of days and bring it, reboil it before eating it. Yeah, my mother, being a medical professional, a registered nurse with a master's degree, was duly horrified. On the other hand, he never got food poisoning, so yeah. Okay, I think I've managed to recover this in time to wax it. If you're hand sewing, remember to beeswax your thread, guys. Everlasting gloop. Gotta boil off the bacteria, you know it. Oh, was there a question about tavern food? Yes, there was fast food. Twitchy is absolutely right. Yes, there was fast food. She is also right. It was restricted to towns and cities that had critical mass for it. But we have images, for instance, of portable ovens on carts being pulled around through the town and people buying the pies that are coming out of the oven. And taverns, absolutely. Not everyone had the time to cook. Not everyone had the ability to cook. Not everyone had a kitchen. That required a certain kind of space that not everyone had. And so, yeah, you could absolutely go to an inn and get and purchase food. Nothing. That is one of those things from the Roman Empire that didn't really go away. It went away in places where the population died, but not entirely. So yeah, there was ready-made food. God knows it was way higher quality than the garbage we can get now, or the garbage most of us can get now in a tavern, right? But yeah, absolutely, it was a thing. And there were fritters. Fritters are such a medieval thing. My God, There are so many recipes for fritters that have survived, and not all of them are luxury, right? There's a lot of fritters where it's just dough that is fried, and then sprinkled with something or not sprinkled with something. Fried dough, absolutely a medieval thing. And fried dough does not have to be an expensive luxury item either. So, yeah, there was street food, there was fast food. It depended on where you were, whether you would have easy access to it. But it was certainly a thing. 100%. Yeah, I would take medieval food over modern food any day. Yep, 100%. Oz says you were talking about a gentleman willing his underwear to his daughter and that the material wouldn't get upcycled for hardware or something like that, but that nuns had knickers. Oh yeah, headwear. Yep. Yeah, that will back to the topic of women's underpants, not hardware. Back to the topic of women's underpants. Yeah, 100%. There's this will from the 14th century around Bologna. There's a whole registry of wills actually from Bologna. So you can actually read through all of these wills and get a really great idea about the kinds of things that regular people owned, because these are the wills of the everyday person. These are not the wills of the great families. These are, wills of monks, not wealthy monks either, of craftsmen, of peasants. And in this will that was lodged by this monk, he bequeaths his underpants to his niece. And someone suggested that he bequeathed them to her so that she could upcycle them into a kerchief. This is a kerchief. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm all about upcycling. And I understand about medieval laundering practices and how very effective they were. However, this monk probably only had 1 or 2 pairs of breeches, which means he wore them a lot. And no amount of laundering after long time wearing is going to remove all of the stains, shall we say. So I just can't imagine a woman of any era upcycling her uncle's breeches that he wore against the areas where waste products left his body into something she would then wear on her head, which would be very visible. I just don't see that happening. Yeah, I don't see it happening. Do you? Would you upcycle a man's breeches, white linen breeches, like white linen boxer shorts, basically, after he had worn them for years, probably? Would you upcycle them? And probably they're not laundered every day. They're laundered about once a week, right? So would you upcycle them into a kerchief? I wouldn't. Jorge, hola, ¿qué tal? Hola, ¿qué tal? ¿Cómo estás? How old is the Cornish pasty? Well, Susan, what defines a Cornish pasty for you? Potatoes are obviously an introduction of the 18th century, a culinary introduction of the 18th century in Europe. So that wouldn't have been part of a medieval pie. But maybe if you replace the potato with turnip, you might get something that could have been plausibly medieval. I have seen plenty of what you're calling a pasty, something in paste. That's why it's called a pasty, right? I have seen plenty of recipes for pasty-like things. Just not necessarily specifically like we now understand the Cornish pasty to be. But yeah, their medieval cookbooks are filled with pasty-like things. They're not baked though. They're more often they're fried. They're fritters. They're treated like fritters. And that's probably because the average person could heat up a pot of oil and fry something, whereas most people didn't have an oven. They would have to take items to the communal ovens or to a private baker and pay to have them baked. So it makes more sense. That's why it's one of the reasons I think fritters are like one of the most common things to do to dough in these medieval cookbooks, is to fry it plain or stuff it with something and fry it, because most people didn't have easy access to ovens. Oh, thank you. Love the necklace. Thank you, Gary. Appreciate that. This is a replica of a jewel owned by Beatrice d'Este. Armor and Castings sells this. You can get this. Really, they did such beautiful work on this thing. So it dates to about this gem. At least the painting in which it's depicted is from like 1490. Yeah, so if you decide to check out Armor and Casting's website, then enter the code Contessa10 and you'll get an extra 10% off. They have amazing replica pieces that I wear with my, like I wear when I dress up really nicely on cruises, for instance, and I put on my evening gown and everything. I wear a lot of their pieces. Yeah, I think these are timeless, not just meant for reenactment. You can wear these in your day-to-day life and look splendid, right? Yeah. Yep. Up Armor and Castings. Yep, love them. Love them. Do they make torques? They do some ancient stuff as well. I would go check out. They've got a massive range. They've got a massive range of replica items. So I would go check out their website because they definitely do a lot of Iron Age stuff. So I would, or at least they have some Iron Age stuff. I would go check that out. I'm very intrigued by the idea of a baking oven on a rolling cart, right? Isn't that an awesome idea? Think about how awesome would it be at a reenactment event to have someone with a baking oven on a rolling cart, just going around selling pies and pasties as they come fresh out of the oven, or even bread as it comes fresh out of the oven. I'm confident that someone in Europe has probably done something like that. I just haven't had the pleasure of the luck to actually have attended such an event myself, but I love the idea. I think it's great. I think it's fantastic. Yep. Yeah, medieval fast food, exactly. Yep. Let me see. Just checking. Dough, cheese, spinach, or turnip, onion, and mushroom. I don't think the Cornish pasties I've had don't have cheese in them or spinach. Or didn't. I don't know. Twitchy, you're actually from that part of the country. What is a typical Cornish pasty to you? Or not from that part of the country, from that part of the world. You're not from Cornwall. At least I don't think you're from Cornwall. Um, yeah, Cornish. Love it. Okay, we need more of that rather than the nobles and knights. Yeah, yeah. I would love to see more ovens. At the big event that I attend every year in the US, Penzic, the big 2-week thing, or I call it a medieval festival, really. It's depending on your own personal mileage will decide whether it's a living history event or not. For me, it's a living history event because me and my household do living history there. There used to be a bakery that actually made medieval baked goods fresh every day. But unfortunately, the people who ran that, got retired and stopped doing it in 1996, sadly. Yeah. Well, if you want torques from Armor and Castings, reach out to them and say it's something you'd be interested in. It might be a direction in which they could go with their goods. Torques, though, remember, torques are like Bronze Age, early Iron Age are torques. Torques are like no longer really being, or not. I have not seen evidence of torques being worn anywhere by the High Middle Ages. And I will say, I say that again, I have not seen evidence of it. So if you've seen evidence of torques being worn in the High Middle Ages or later, I'd be interested to see that. But where I lived in Germany was, when I lived in Germany, I studied at the University of Heidelberg, and then I kind of stayed and ended up living in Hessen basically for, total of 12 years spent in Germany. And that part of Germany has a lot of Celtic archaeology, ancient Celtic archaeology, not Celtic like you all are thinking Irish Celtic. No, ancient Celtic archaeology. And so there were a lot of torques that were found in the ground. So for me, torques are a Bronze Age. To me, torques are a Bronze Age, early Iron Age ornament, not a high medieval ornament. But I haven't actually looked to see when when other parts of Europe stopped wearing the torques, because the Celts kind of brought the torques everywhere with them wherever they immigrated to. No offense to the Contessa. No. I did not take any offense to you suggesting we need more bakers. I agree. We don't need more aristocrats sitting around sewing or dancing or holding salons. I think I think keeping that number relatively low is perfectly acceptable, especially if I get to be one of the few. Right? No, 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 no offense. I agree. We need more craftsmen. We need more bakers, especially more bakers with ovens on portable carts. I support this message 100%. Yeah, I haven't seen, yeah, twitchy, I just like to hedge my bets when I try not to make absolute statements unless I really, really know my subject. And the evolution or life cycle of the torque is not one of my areas of specialty. So yeah, I always like to hedge my statements with I haven't seen evidence of it, which doesn't mean there isn't evidence out there. I just haven't seen it. But I know a lot of people want to do Celtic reenactment, and unfortunately, they think they don't realize that the Celts are an ancient peoples that covered all of Europe, almost all of Europe, by the way, at some point, and that they basically merged into the peoples where they settled. Their culture eventually sort of adopted whatever the next culture to come down the line was. So the Celts who were living in Germany, for instance, eventually Romanized. um, and and then of course other peoples moved in and they intermarried with them, and their culture kind of became subsumed by the next culture. There were elements that survived, but it wasn't a pure Celtic culture anymore. The same thing is true of Ireland. I hate to tell people this. Ireland is not just Celts. It just isn't. And the whenever people talk about Celtic medieval Celts, I'm like, ooh, are there really medieval Celts though? Mm, Depends on how you define the Middle Ages, I guess. Traveling reenactment baker equals a new life goal. Yeah, 100%. 100%. Right. Neves says the Dying Gaul was a romanticized work made much later. That said, it is entirely possible that they were still in use during Julius Caesar's conquest of Gaul. I mean, I know that I have seen some torques that are dated to the 1st or 2nd century AD, but that's not the Middle Ages. That's still not medieval. Yeah, it also depends on how you define Celt. Unfortunately, the word Celt has been misappropriated pretty hard. It's been abused, and it's been highly diluted, and that's a big problem. Yeah, that's definitely a big problem, and it's been given connotations that it was never meant to have originally. So yeah, yep. So let's see. Uh, baking, baking food, medieval myth busting. Yes. Okay. So just remember, in short, just because peasants didn't have access and could only rarely purchase exotic and expensive items like spices. They did though, occasionally for special, like once a year, we have records of well-heeled peasants purchasing expensive spices like cinnamon and ginger for Christmas, for instance, for the Christmas feasts, plural, because it's 12 days of Christmas, right? So we know that, yes, sometimes peasants, who were the majority of the population, would have access to those spices depending on when and where they were, specifically in medieval Europe. So even it's not that they never got to try a pie that had cinnamon in it, for instance, a tart that had cinnamon in it. It just wouldn't have been something they could have done every day, right? Bostonian equals Celtic. Oh my gosh. Um, Twitchy says it really annoys me as the ethnic Celts intermarried and merged with the Saxon and Germanic tribes. Same with their cultures. It's an example of how societies shift and change over time. Yep, 100%. Agree with you 100% there. And in Ireland, you've got all kinds of influences all across the Middle Ages. You've got major influences. You've got the Norse, you've got the Normans, you've got, the who would become the English, right? You've got sailors and merchants interacting all the time. So it's this weird, stubborn insistence that Ireland was this pure Celtic people throughout the Middle Ages. It's just not true. It's just not true, guys. Sorry. Celt isn't ethnic, it's cultural. Well, depend. Ooh, now we're getting into the definition of terms. What's the difference between an ethnicity and a culture? I'm going. Welcome to Medieval Sewing Party with the Creative Contessa, where I adopt the role of Socrates, where I ask all the questions and give you no answers. And ultimately, you will probably want me to drink some hemlock. Right? Is it, yeah, it's how do you define what's the difference between ethnicity and a culture? Does ethnicity matter if you don't have the culture to go with it? Ooh, now we might get into some really dangerous territory. Yeah, for those of you who might misunderstand why Socrates was, well, he wasn't even executed. He committed suicide. He volunteered. They gave him every out. They gave him every chance to not have to be executed, and he refused. The problem with Socrates is that he had this majorly influential school of philosophy, and he kept he kept asking all of these really dangerous questions, but not giving an answer, right? He would ask people, you know, what is justice? And then they would go down this long rabbit hole and never actually get to a definition of justice. And so eventually it was actually starting to undermine the foundations of Athenian society at the level of the leadership. And so they viewed it as being very dangerous. They viewed it as insidious and seditious in a dangerous way. And so that is why ultimately he was condemned to death. And they literally said, all you have to do is just say you weren't right, like you don't agree with this, you don't believe this. And he refused out of principle. So, he drank the hemlock willingly and almost gleefully based on the records we have. Yeah, so that's the problem with the Socratic method, specifically in the way that Socrates actually went about it, is you never arrive at an answer. You just basically walk away feeling like you know way less than you knew at the beginning of the conversation. Yeah, so yeah, that's why that was the reference to you may at the end of this stream want me to drink some hemlock. Yeah, yeah, Neves says, heck, Socrates refused to flee Athens too. Yeah, he was given like every opportunity. Exile. They're like, we don't really want to execute you, man, but you gotta give a little bit here. And he was so obstinate that he refused. Let's see. Don't forget the Welsh Celts, ancient Britons to Romans to Normans to Anglo-Saxons to English influences with a few Irish and Vikings in the mix. Yeah, 100%. Yep, Oz, you are correct. Let me see. Tomacor says genetics equals ethnic and culture is the people group. Interesting. So where did the Iceni fit into this spaghetti of cultures? The Iceni were Britons. They were, as far as I know, they were technically a Celtic tribe. Um, yeah, they were technically a Celtic tribe originally, but by the time if you're talking about by the time Boudica comes along, there's been a lot of intermarrying there too. Yeah. As Neves says, the Socratic method, the use of the method is not to find the truth per se, but to reveal unquestioned assumptions without reasoned basis. Yeah, unfortunately, Neves, and I agree with you, that is the purpose of the method, but he didn't have any other method, apparently. So it was just creating this existential crisis in Athens where the youth were starting to get really disturbed and kind of, what is the point of life? There are no answers. It was bordering on nihilism to a certain extent. Yeah. Celtic culture. Neva says Celtic culture overwhelmingly occurred along ethnic lines. The two were not cleanly distinguishable for most of history. Geographic lines. So geographic lines, the Celts basically were a nomadic people, and they had settlements all across Europe, from freaking what is now the Czech Republic all the way to Spain, France, up to Ireland, across Britain, right? They were this nomadic people who just kept going until they basically hit Land's End in Ireland. Yeah, there's some twitchy, there's some debate about the Iceni and their origins. They get called Britain, like the Romans call them Britons. In the ancient Roman sources, they call them Britons. Not that those sources are necessarily reliable. Here I go with the Socratic method. History is fiction. We can't know anything. There is no truth. Oh, goodness. That is definitely not where I wanted to take this sewing party today. So is anyone working on anything out there? Has anyone been doing any interesting research or any interesting experimental archaeology lately? For our part, I am almost done with my brand new 18th century style jogori. That's the little jacket thing that the bolero-like garment that is historical and traditional in Korea for women and men to wear on their as an outer layer. I'll show you that in a moment after I finish this particular line of stitching. I have also, I just have to attach the ties, actually, the kodum, and then it's done. We are also starting a new set of patterns. These are going to be the really sexy, elegant, highly sophisticated leather patterns that ladies were wearing in Flanders and France and England as well in the 14th and 15th century. And pattens are basically overshoes. These are the shoes that you wear over top of your leather turn shoes to protect them, and also to protect your feet, to give a little more padding, to give a little more longevity to your shoes and your feet. And we're making them with a cork interior, as the original ones were, and they will be covered in leather, and they will have just the front part of the pattern. They will not have these are not meant for hiking. These are not hiking patterns. These are like town patterns. And they will just basically be like slides, like what you know of as a slide or a mule. But they'll have a little buckle over the toes for ease of adjustment as the leather stretches. So I'm really excited to finally have a stylish pair of pattens for my Burgundian attire versus my kind of what I call my hiking pattens, which are the ones made out of wood. Definitely intended for the lower socioeconomic side of the spectrum rather than a luxury good worn by the well-heeled of society. So this new pair is very clearly a pair that would have been worn by the upper crust of society. So very appropriate for a comtesse. And there's a whole bunch of the straps of these patterns that have survived, the triangular straps that go over the front of the foot, that actually, this is really weird. In Flanders, in the Low Countries, and Burgundy in the 14th and 15th century, there was a fascinating trend for the patterns to have scenes from Tristan and Isolde on them, like tooled into the leather. Very famously, mostly the scene where Tristan and Isolde play chess together. Right. And so we're going to hopefully we'll be doing that. I'm hoping we'll be able to manage to do a tooling of Tristan. Are you listening? No, apparently not. I'm hoping we'll be able to do the tooling of the scene where Tristan and Isolde play chess together. And it's really weird because they have found dozens, if not hundreds, of these leather strappy bits that have survived from these patents. And it was this trend for a while. I was teasing. I was talking about our new patents. You're not listening though.
Oh.
Yeah. I was saying I was hoping that we would do the tooled scene where Tristan and Isolde are playing chess.
Oh, yeah. Because that's going to be easy.
Yep, because it's going to be easy. So that's a new project for my condottiero, and I'm still working on the new black Burgundian gown. I got sidetracked a bit because I wanted to try my hand at making more hanbok, so making the jogori in this case. especially because I'm about to go to the National Folk Museum here in Korea in 2 weeks, and I'm going to be holding 3 weeks, and I'm going to be holding and examining with my hands in firsthand, no glass between us, garments from the 16th century. So I'm just so excited about the learnings that that's going to take. So I wanted to get some practice pieces done so that when I get to the real reproductions using the learnings from examining these extant garments from the 16th century in Korea, I'll actually already have the foundational techniques down. Okay, here's the cork. See, it's a sheet of cork like this. And these are the two patterns. So it'll be nice and squishy. Cork has a nice natural squish to it, right? So it's actually really cushiony. It feels like walking on a cloud, basically. And this is how they'll be shaped. And remember that this will go under my shoe. So it's not like my foot is going to be squeezed into this. This is actually basically the shape of the part of my foot that actually touches the ground. This is how much of my foot touches the ground. Not as much of your foot touches the ground as you think it does. So these will be the basis for it. And then we'll be covering them in leather that'll be nicely tooled. And then I'll have these beautiful, sexy overshoes to wear with my medieval turn shoes. Very excited. By the way, cork, for those who don't know, comes from a kind of oak tree. It's a cork tree, and they only grow in very, very specific parts of the world. And this is the bark. This is basically the bark of the cork tree. So it is, hey, some of you may wonder, what is cork? It's bark. Okay, comments or questions that I may have missed. Let's see. Good morning, Pranji. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Yep. Oak bark, I did not know that one. Yep, but it's a specific kind of oak tree. It's not like every oak tree produces cork. It's a specific kind of oak cork tree. And they're actually harvested in such a way, the people who do it well, and Spain is one of the few places where these trees grow. The people who do it well know exactly how much cork they can take off at a time so that the tree can recover and grow more cork. So yeah, it's actually peeled off of a tree. It's very interesting to watch it happen, to actually see cork harvesting in progress. Not the one out in our front yard. Nope. It's a specific kind of cork tree, and they only grow in very specific climates. So they're not quite as resilient or as omnipresent as regular oak trees are, standard oak trees. I definitely need to commission some patents for my medieval shoes for my nun kits. I also need to make an unbleached linen undercoat too for my Benedictine kit. Yeah, unbleached, be nice. Will be a sickly gray color. The natural color of flax that most people never ever see because it's nearly always bleached. Yeah, good stuff. Yeah, so I've got, I'm getting very close to being done with my new black wool Burgundian overgown. Hopefully that will be done in the next month, and then I will get to started on the rest of the garments I need in time for my 2-week medieval living history thing in August. Yep. Looking forward to making my new Opus Anglicanum piece. I'm hoping to use naturally dyed silks and true gold passing threads for a real medieval experience. Yeah, true gold passing threads. Ah, fantastic. It's that's something you really need to work up to. Because working with gold passing thread is not as easy as people think as people might assume it is. Just because people assume a lot of things are easier than they are, actually. That's really cool. I have in my stores some medievally naturally dyed silk filament that was a gift to me, and I've been keeping it for the right project. It is in some pretty bright colors, and it's only 3 colors, sort of yellow, a magenta, pink, and blue. So it will be for obviously a very specific kind of project or sets of projects. I would need more colors than that to successfully execute a project with any kind of shading in it anyway. Yeah, so let's see. What else have I been reading up on this week? Oh, potatoes. I learned something really interesting about historical cuisine and also kind of modern cuisine. And Jorge, estás allí? Ya estás allí? Um, because in the Andes, the Andes are where potatoes come from originally. Maybe you don't know that. That's where potatoes come from originally. And the original cultivars of potatoes were toxic. Wild potatoes are toxic. They still are. Okay, obviously the modern ones aren't as toxic. The alkaloids, it's glycoalkaloids, I think, that make it toxic. The modern cultivars have been selectively bred over the millennia so that the glycoalkaloids have been reduced. I think that modern potatoes still do have glycoalkaloids, and it's one of the reasons that potatoes are inflammatory for some people. At least I know there is something inflammatory in potatoes, and I think it might be the glycoalkaloids. Not enough to kill you, but enough to possibly make your body really unhappy, especially if you eat a lot of it. Might be one of the cause of chronic arthritis from which a lot of Westerners, a lot of people, not just Westerners, suffer because potatoes have now become so prevalent in our diets. But the thing about potatoes originally in the Andes, even before they had achieved a selective breeding that really reduced the glycoalkaloids. Apparently, ancient peoples living in the Andes were still eating these potatoes, but they would dip it in an edible clay called taco. Edible clay. You heard me right. Edible clay. It actually, I've seen it. It's combined with salt and water to make a sauce, a dipping sauce, basically. And the edible clay, the taco, apparently it has like a creamy taste because people are still doing this. They still eat potatoes dipped in taco to this day in the Andes, so in like Chile and Ecuador and Peru. And the reason that historians, anthropologists, archaeologists think that humans first got the bright idea to dip the toxic potato in the clay, this chaco, this edible clay slurry, is because the parrots do it, the birds do it. The birds in that part of the world figured out that if you dip this toxic plant in the root, this toxic tuber in the clay, then the clay absorbs the toxins and carries the alkaloids out of your body. How clever is that? Like, humans are great. Humans are so observant. Like, those animals are dipping that root in that clay and they're not dying for it. But Jorge over there, of course, it wouldn't have been Jorge because that's a European name. I actually don't know any ancient Andean names, so I'm just going to not pretend. You know, Bucko over there, he didn't do so well after eating that tuber, but that bird seems to be doing fine. That bird is dipping it in that mud. Well, let's try eating the mud. And so it is an actually edible clay. How crazy is that? So don't try this at home, folks. Do not go out to your local clay reservoir in your backyard or whatever and just, try making up a slurry. It's a very specific kind of clay. I don't know where else it's available other than that part of South America. But clay can contain a lot of really toxic shit like arsenic and lead. So don't just go get some clay and try this at home, right? But now I really want to try this. I really want to try Andean potatoes dipped in taco because that just fascinates me. The idea of edible clay. It's really interesting. And that people have been doing it for literally thousands of years is also really interesting. They've excavated in the Andes, they have excavated pottery from 4,000 years ago or older that has taco residue inside of it. So, this is a practice that has been around for a very long time. And that kind of, at the same time, apparently the peoples of the Andes in that part of the world were selectively breeding the potatoes to reduce the amount of glycoalkaloids in them. Obviously, they didn't know it was glycoalkaloids. No one knew that until the 19th century when alkaloids were literally discovered by one of the Merck family. But they knew that there was something bad about it, and they figured out that maybe this tuber, this potato wasn't as pain-inducing as that one, so let's breed this one and breed it and breed it and breed it. So that's how we now have potatoes that we can more or less eat without regretting our life choices. But even still, to this day, despite the fact that the potatoes are no longer toxic, people still continue to eat this edible clay sauce. So I love that idea so much. I must try this. Aren't potatoes related to deadly nightshade or something? Yes, they are a nightshade. Oz, they are absolutely a nightshade. All of the nightshades, whether they are deadly or not, all of the nightshades actually have alkaloids in them or other contain other natural chemicals. Natural doesn't mean good necessarily, that are inflammatory. Tomatoes, eggplants, zucchini, I think also. Don't hold me to the zucchini one. But yeah, potatoes, eggplants, and tomatoes are all nightshades. And they actually, if you really get down to it, they are actually inflammatory. They are actually inflammatory. And that's why, one of the things, if people are suffering from inflammatory illnesses, if they're suffering from rheumatoid arthritis, if they're suffering from they're just in pain all the time, I suggest to them, have you tried an elimination diet? Get rid of the potatoes, get rid of the corn, get rid of the tomatoes, get rid of all the nightshades, stop refined sugar, stop eating wheat, and milk, also dairy. Get rid of the dairy. And give your body a couple of weeks to reset, and then start introducing each food group one at a time, waiting multiple weeks, if not months, to see what happens before moving on to the next one. And what a lot of people are finding is they actually can't handle tomatoes. They cannot handle tomatoes. And unfortunately, it's not the kind of reaction that makes people think they're poisonous, because you don't end up in a hospital needing to have charcoal pumped down into your stomach, right? It's not that bad, but it's one of these cumulative effect situations where, decades of eating tomatoes results in a lot of inflammatory response. So, for example, and not everyone, your DNA plays a really big part in this equation, but there's increasing evidence that a lot more people are really sensitive to potatoes, corn, and tomatoes than previously thought. Let me see. Yeah, people ate way too many nightshades, 100%. Yeah, your body doesn't digest corn all that well. No, your body doesn't digest any grain all that well. Don't get me started on the grain train. Okay, so grains. The agricultural revolution. Yes, grains provided a valuable and easy source of calories in an era when calories were hard to come by. We no longer exist in that era. We exist in a calorifically rich environment in the developed world. In the developed world, the developed world, and our bodies have actually not adapted to digest grains well at all. We don't digest them well. They actually are destructive to the microbiota in our intestines. They actually, especially if you're eating whole grains, and y'all are going to hate me when I say this, whole grains are problematic if they're not fermented or sprouted, because the thing that makes it a whole grain, the bran, is coated in something called in chemicals called phytonutrients. Those phytonutrients are designed to enter your digestive tract for the seed. Grain is a seed, for the seed to enter your digestive tract and come out on the other side whole, but fully nourished with micronutrients, so that the seed can then grow successfully. How does it come out of your digestive tract with micronutrients? The phytonutrients bind with the vitamins in your intestines that have not been absorbed yet. And in your digestive tract, they bind with it chemically, so that instead of you getting the calcium from that thing you ate, the seed takes the calcium with it. Instead of all the vitamin B complex that you consumed, the seed goes away with the vitamin B complex. That's the problem with whole grains. The way humans actually adapted for that, just like with the choco and the toxic potatoes, and then eventually selectively breeding not toxic potatoes. We developed fermentation. We soured our grain. We sprouted our grain. We soaked it until it sprouted. And that breaks down the phytonutrients so that there's nowhere near as many phytonutrients on the grain, and that it becomes therefore more digestible because the grain, the bran, the coating of the grain is no longer literally robbing you of vitamins on its way out. But guess what people aren't doing anymore, especially in the developed world? We're not eating fermented and sprouted grains anymore. No, 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 because that cannot be industrially produced and maximize profits. It's too expensive. It's too time consuming to produce billions of pounds of bread a year if we were actually fermenting it and we're soaking those seeds. It would cut into the profit margins of the people who make the mass industrial factories that now make bread. Right. So, and most people don't even like, they don't like sourdough. Most people these days do not like the taste of sourdough, because real sourdough, I mean, honest to God sourdough that's been fermented enough to actually be nutritious, no one likes that. It's too sour. No one wants that. They want bread that's like sugar in their mouth. Right. So yeah, the things that actually made grains, and not just corn, digestible, we don't do anymore. You know, the way that the Mesoamericans they figured out a way to make corn digestible, right? It's a chemical process. There's a natural chemical they add to it to actually make it digestible. But again, that's not how we're eating corn anymore, maize, as some of you might know it. No, we are not. And it's not digestible, and it's actually bad for us and inflammatory. The end. Yeah, Twitchy, you and I love sourdough, and I'm just going to be judgmental here. If you don't fall in this category, don't take this personally, what I'm about to say. But people with taste like sourdough. Yeah, phytic acid. Yeah, sourdough alone eliminates phytic acid by something like 60% minimum. Yeah, and Nevis, the other thing, the phytic acid, the longer you ferment it, the longer you let it sour, the more phytic acid breaks down. So a long ferment is way better than a quick ferment in that regard. Yep. Yep, there we are. There, Ursel said it. Yep. This is a word I never ever say aloud, so forgive me on this. Nixtamalized, right, is the process by which corn is made digestible. Yep. Yeah, and Nevis comments that East Asians have adapted a bit more to carbs. Yep, they have, and they had to, because that's how they dealt with famines. But the kind of carbs, you know, that's the thing. It's not all carbs. You can actually see there's been a big weight increase in Koreans since they started eating Western style carbs. Right? They're no longer just eating rice. They're eating pastries and bread and whatnot made out of wheat flour, and it's not sourdough. They're not, you know, these are refined flour pastries, right? And so there's been a massive issue. Cardiovascular disease is on the rise, diabetes is on the rise, obesity is on the rise, right? Because it's not just any carbs, right? They've adapted specifically for rice, really. Yep. Don't get me started on grains. Yep. Sourdough is not everywhere, unfortunately. It depends on where you live. Villa Vendetta says sourdough is everywhere these days. It really isn't. Most of America, you cannot get real sourdough. You just can't. There's grocery stores don't sell it, not real sourdough. They sell bread that they call sourdough. It's not. It's like 2% sourdough, 98% regular yeast-raised bread, right? And they add a souring agent to it to make it taste sour, but it's not really sourdough bread. So in most places in America, you know, outside of the big cities, for the most part, you will not be able to find true sourdough bread. You just won't. You'll find bread that's called that, but it's not that. Europe is different, obviously. Europe, actually, I can't, not UK is different yet again, but mainland Europe, I'm specifically thinking Germany and France. They've kind of never lost their tradition of sourdough baking. And they've only recently, unfortunately, come to the table of mass-produced bread, mass-produced baked goods, relatively recently. Whereas in America, we've been mass-producing bread since the 19th century. Industrial Revolution for the win, baby. Yeah, Nevis says he gets his sourdough from local small bakeries, but the reality is that the average American town does not have a local sourdough bakery. They just don't. If you have one in your town, you are very lucky. It's just not something that's common. It isn't that common. You might think it's common because it's near you, but that doesn't mean it's everyone. It just isn't that common. And even then, again, you have to ask, is it real sourdough? How long is the ferment? Yeah. In America, I think a lot of people make their own sourdough. In America, I think a lot of people think they make sourdough. During COVID, there was a big spike of everyone suddenly getting into sourdough making. I'm not certain how many people, I'd be interested to see a survey of all 300 million people who live in the US to see how many, or all the households maybe in the US, to see how many households are actually doing sourdough baking on a regular basis. Again, I don't think it's as many as we think it is. I think social media makes us think that way more people are doing sourdough. I also think that if you're in this chat, if you're in my community, you probably have a data bias. Because we are the kind of people who do sourdough. But let's be honest, beloved community, we are not the average. We're not the normal. We're to the right of the bell curve, for better or worse. We are to the right of the bell curve, and that's not a brag. Trust me, there are bell curves to which you don't want to be on the right of. But we don't represent the majority of the country. Us Americans who are in my community, you have to admit that. Yeah, major selection bias, 100%. That was the term I was looking for. Thank you, Nevis. Selection bias, not data bias, selection bias. Yeah. Oh, yeah, Tomacore, I agree with that, 100%. People who eat sourdough are very likely to make it. Yeah, I agree with that 100%. More likely to be the people making it. Yep. So are all the Trodwife videos not real sourdough? Villa Vendetta Trodwives are not that common in the country. And I don't know. I can't stand those women. They disgust me on so many levels because they are not living an actual Trodwife lifestyle. Like, they've got lots of money, they've got sponsorships, they're very well off. They can cosplay at being a housewife, basically. Yeah. So I don't really watch many of those, so I don't know what techniques they're using. I don't know. But Trodwives aren't Trodwives, those influencers, they don't represent the majority of the population either, because if there were, there would literally be millions of them. Yeah. Let me see. Takes 6 months or something like that to get a sourdough starter going. Nah, I can get a fully mature starter in 2 to 3 weeks. Or a decent starter, fully mature, because it depends on what you mean by mature. I can get a starter going that will actually produce a successful loaf of bread within 2 to 3 weeks. Let me see. How do I feel about the selection bias for the win? I'd been doing sourdough before the pandemic. Okay, let me see. Questions. How do I feel about the Tudors? The show, The Tudors, is terrible. I mean, it depends on what you mean. Do you mean the costumes? Do you mean the clothing? It's pretty bad. The clothing is terrible. The clothing in the Tudors is terrible. The men are dressed in Ren Fair chic from a variety of styles across the 16th century, in nothing particularly authentic or accurate. And the women are wearing highly objectifying, super sexy, heavy makeup, heavy modern glam makeup, clothing that would look better on a Paris runway or a local BDSM club than would be at home in Tudor England. Yeah, no, the Tudors is terrible. It's terrible. Clothing, especially for the women, and makeup and hair is extra bad for the women, but it's also bad for the men. So I couldn't get past half of the first episode of the Tudors, I'll be frank. Medieval ironing. I want to try some actual medieval ironing, but are limited on my equipment. Any suggestions? Medieval ironing. So are you talking about using a hot iron, or are you talking about using a sleek stone? So it seems that I do not have evidence of hot ironing before the 15th century. It seems that in Western Europe, I'm not speaking for Asia, right? Just in Western Europe, I don't have evidence of hot ironing before the 15th century. I have sleeky stones. sleek stones, right? Which is literally, in my case, a piece of glass, or it was probably like this, right? Like this, a piece of glass, right? And it's actually referenced in a recipe for starching, a recipe and instructions from the 15th century for starching garments. It actually references that the last thing you do in your starching process is use a sleeky stone to smooth it out, right? So there's an image from the 15th century, one singular image I have found from Germany from the 15th century that depicts what might be an iron used for ironing, but it's not being used and it's not apparently hot. Um, so yeah, it seems that it's more likely that fleeky stones are the things being used in the 15th century and before, rather than a hot iron. If you want to play with if you want to play with early modern ironing with an iron, then get one of those like those, the solid irons it's just a chunk of iron with a handle that you can get in like any antique store these days, the ones from the 19th century. And then you heat that up in the oven and then use that. I would do a lot of test pieces on scraps of linen about which you care nothing first. Yeah. So that's the thing about medieval irons. There just doesn't seem, I haven't seen, now if any of you have evidence positive, primary source, not some fellow blogger or something, primary source evidence of hot irons being used before the 15th century or even in the 15th century, I would love to see that. Please do absolutely point that out to me. But it really seems that they were just using sleeky stones. And it could be that they were heated up, not super hot, but like in warm water is one suggestion, that maybe, this is conjectural, it could be that it would be heated up in a pot of hot water, and then it's warm, and that will make it warmer, just warm enough to actually get some good heat action for getting wrinkles out and putting creases in things, but not enough that you're going to burn the fabric. Like, that is actually the benefit of a glass sleeky stone, is heating it up in the water means it's not going to get too hot. It'll be enough to manipulate the fabric, but not enough to damage it. Let me see how I feel about the Tudors. I usually watch videos talking about how wrong they are, not their content alone. Oh, yeah. So Villa Vendetta, yeah, they're usually just wrong. I have no respect for Trodwife influencers. Goose egg respect for them. Let me see. As Nevis says, actual Trodwives are not the kind to video their domestic labors and privacy to the general public for money. Yep, 100% Nevis, 100%. And they barely exist and never were what people fetishize them as anyways. Yep, all true, Nevis. Sleek stones, that's what I meant. Yeah, where to get a sleek stone? Find a glass blower. Find a glass blower and ask them to make you one. It's easy, it's not hard to make. You just need a blob of glass. A heavy blob of glass, right? So find a local glass blower. Unfortunately, because of the tariff situation, it might not be possible to get one from the people who made mine, or you can, but you'll probably pay fucking tariffs, right? Mine was made by Historical Glassworks. That's the name of this. He's a friend of mine. I've known him for almost 30 years at this point in the medieval living history community. He's from New Jersey originally. I knew him originally under the fun moniker of Arab Boy, but we're not going to get into that. Historical Glassworks. He's a master glass blower. He has toured all over Europe and done glass blowing at historic sites using historical glass blowing equipment, including, I think he went to, I forget which of the villas he went to, the ancient Roman villas he went to in Germany, and actually did ancient Roman glass blowing. And he did the glassware, he did all of the replica glassware for the king, for the one about Henry V, right? So Historical Glassworks is where I got my sleeky stone. Yep. Let me see. I'm right behind on the comments. It looks like a giant pestle glass artist used to mill paint. Yes. Yes. So it's Villa Vendetta. That is a valid point. This looks like the glass pestle that artists use to mill pigments. Yes, 100%. And you know what? Medieval people were smart about, multi-purpose tools. So it can, a thing can be many things, as they say. Yeah, 100%. It looks like there's a term for It's not called a pestle. It's called something else for illuminators, for grinding, milling the pigment. Damn it. I've forgotten the word for that. Ah! If you remember the word for the process of grinding pigment to turn it into paint that illuminators use, please pop. I've got a complete mind block on it. But yeah, looks like that. Let me see. I've used iron skillets to iron my dress shirts. Oh yeah, Jim. I love that kind of ingenuity. If you want to see a trod wife, you need to go to the oldest weekly Renfest in history, Latin Mass. Try low Latin Mass to see the real trod fams. Yeah, right? Yeah. Mulling. Thank you, Twitchy. Thank you. Right there. Mulling. Thank you, Twitchy. Yes. Mulling stones. Mulling stones. Yes, I'm pretty certain that they were used for both, honestly. Yep. Oh, and we've now have a muller in so there is now tagged in this live stream, although you may or may not be able to see it, a muller has been tagged in the things that if you buy them from the link that's on this live stream, I get some kind of commission. I don't know. This is the ecosystem in which we creators have to operate. YouTube pays us like almost a very tiny fraction of money for the amount of work we put into this stuff. Seriously. It's garbage what YouTube actually pays us, which is why I appreciate all of my patrons and my channel members and my Facebook members so very much, because you guys are willing to actually toss money my way to keep doing this. And I really appreciate you. I'm honored, really, I am. Yeah. So yeah, if you want to do medieval ironing, this seems to be the way it was done before the 16th century. And it's very effective, especially if your garment is still wet or lightly wet, then it can be very, very effective. The other thing about the starching process that I've read, and this was really interesting, the way you made the starch, the recipe actually talks, it's back to fermentation, everyone. You actually take bran, wheat bran, most likely. You take bran, although I think any bran would work. You take bran and you boil it in water for a certain amount of time. I don't remember, it didn't actually say like so many Hail Marys or whatnot, but I think it's, boil it until it is done is what the recipe said. Medieval recipes, so useless. But then you let it sit for 3 days. It does specify that. You let the water and the bran sit for 3 days or until the water turns sour. Actually specifies that, sour or acidic. Those two terms are both used in this. It's in Latin originally, the translation. Let it sit for 3 days or until it turns acidic or sour, whichever comes first. And then you strain the bran out, and then you dip your fabric right into that water. And you swirl it around, and then you take your fabric out, and then it says to let it dry and then to use your sleeky stone to smooth it out. So I'm trying to get some bran so I've got a rooftop. I'm trying to get some bran so I can run this experiment and see what kind of starch that solution actually produces. And I don't remember if there was, offhand, I don't remember if this recipe had a quantity of water to bran. I kind of think it did, though, unusually. So I'm really interested to try that out, especially the instructions. The instructions actually say to use a sleeky stone to then smooth it out, to polish it, I think is the word it actually uses. So yeah, very, very interested to try that out, because I have the sleeky stone, but if you can't get a glass stone, you know what they used in medieval Ireland up until the 19th century, apparently, and maybe even some people still use them? Neolithic axe heads. Neolithic axe heads were used as sleeky stones. So if you can get your hands on a nice Neolithic axe head, maybe Paleolithic might work too, but Neolithic is better because they're more worked. they're more refined. They're smoother and flatter, right? Neolithic axe heads were used at the very least in medieval Ireland, possibly in other parts of Europe too. I haven't found evidence in other parts of Europe, but I have found proof positive that they were using Neolithic axe heads in medieval Ireland for their sleeky stones. So if you live in a place with a good Neolithic archaeological record and you just happen to find some Neolithic axe heads lying around, you can use that in your medieval kit and be very authentic. How's that for upcycling? Yep. Okay, so let's look at this kamicha and see what we've got going on here in terms of repairs. So I have finished, I put a big giant patch on the inside. And this is at the shoulder. So the patch is here at the shoulder of my garment, like that. And this is a spot that has experienced a lot of wear. A lot of wear. See that? Maybe a little bit. Right. The fabric is very thin though. But this is a part of the garment that does get a lot of wear. And even historical Korean garments show exactly the same amount of wear and tear right there. So in the Korean garments, they actually just built in at the beginning of the construction of the jogori, they actually put extra reinforcement right here because they knew that's where it was going to wear out. But medieval garments don't show the same reinforcement. The few extant smocks that have survived from the 15th century, they don't show reinforcement here. So apparently we weren't as clever. So now I'm having to patch it up. And now that I've put like a reinforcing patch here underneath, I'm going to go in and I'm just going to actually I'm going to basically quilt this down to the patch so that the shell fabric and the patch become one fabric, one layer of fabric, basically. I'm going to thread glue it together. And I'm also especially going to go over this wear spot with some darning like stitches to kind of try to make it lay flat again. Did your uncle bequeath you that in his will? Yeah, my uncle, the monk. Good stuff, Tomakor. Good stuff. Ryan just tagged a replica Neolithic axe head, mostly because I was surprised to find one. It's amazing the things you can find on the internet these days. Let me see. Okay. So yeah, let me show you. Go ahead and show everyone my new joggery. So this, it's not quite done, but it's almost done. This is it, unfortunately. Okay, I'm going to have to pin that or it's not going to stay. So this was based on the 18th century style of joggery, Korean traditional, historical / traditional Korean fabric or clothing. I hate the word traditional. I hate the word traditional. I hate the expression traditional costume because traditional costume is not necessarily historical, right? So it gets really tricky. This is more of a historical style. This is more of the historical style, right? And so basically it's worn here like this. I'd actually be able to put it on. How's this for some fusion? Let's do some Korean French fusion. I don't know if this will even work. So I actually utilized scrap fabric that I had lying around because this is the first ever one I've made. And I was teaching myself a lot of things, especially about the measurement systems that were used to create these garments. Okay, there we go. I think that looks much better. Right. So obviously it was not made to be worn over a girdle, but it was made to be worn over, a garment because they didn't just wear these just by themselves. There were lots of layers involved. So yeah, I still have to attach the koram, the ties there, right? So this is, you can see it's got a gusset here in the underarm, which is one of the ways that they were building these at the time, because of course, this isn't just a question of mobility, and it's not just that it's pretty because it's in a contrasting fabric, in this case, an expensive silk damask from Rome. It's also the spot where this wears out. This wears out really quickly. And so if you just automatically make this as a gusset, then it can just be replaced really easily without having to retailor the whole garment, right? So you can see it's not as short, like the modern ones are really, really short. So this is slightly longer. This comes down to about the bottom of my main ribs, right? And then the skirt with which it'll be worn is the chima with which it'll be worn is one that is waist level, not like the modern ones that come up really high. Unfortunately, because the wool under this is so floofy, you can't really get the full effect of the joggery. But yeah, I'm really happy how it's turned out because I figured out how to make this myself. No one taught me. I had to figure out a bunch of things, and I'm Yeah, I'm happy how it turned out. These are all Italian silks. None of this is Korean silk. So this is a 15th century damask replica, 15th century silk damask, and this is just a modern Dupioni. So yeah, but yeah, very happy. So the last thing to do is actually to attach the koram, the ties, and then I can wear it out and about in combination with Western garments or with my actual chima. Yep, quite nice. Very happy how it turned out. Lots of lessons learned, of course, along the way. As always, that's the way the world works. Let me see. I was asking earlier about Korean mulberry fabric clothing. Tell me about Korean mulberry paper clothing. Oh, paper clothing is not very common. It is a thing. There's mulberry paper is traditional Korean paper. It's made from mulberry pulp, basically, and they're actually making it into clothing, but it's mostly a high fashion item, like it's runway items. I haven't really seen stores selling it, but it's super super biodegradable, really good for the environment, especially when it's dyed with the natural dyes. Yeah, so the paper clothing, I haven't really seen it being sold in your average store, shall we say. It seems to be a runway fashion item or a specialty item as part of sustainability movements that are springing up and being supported here in Korea. Okay, other questions? Yep. Okay. So everyone, I'm going to go ahead and ask are there any final questions or comments? If you have not yet liked, double tap that screen, please. And of course, subscribe. I thought they made it traditionally. Oh no, I don't think mulberry paper clothing, as far as I know, is not a traditional thing. It's a more recent thing, as far as I understand. I've not, and at least in it, so mulberry paper clothing, I haven't seen it discussed very much. I've been doing a lot of research into historical Korean clothing, and mulberry paper clothing is not coming up in my research. I think it's a more modern thing. Yeah, not so much a traditional thing. Yeah, there's a big movement in Korea right now to combine traditional materials and traditional lines in ways that are unconventional and that haven't been used before. So I attended this sustainable fashion exhibit a year and a half ago with a friend from Texas, actually, a fellow creator, a designer, fashion designer, and he'd been invited from Texas to come and display his sustainable fashion pieces. And that was the first time I'd ever seen mulberry paper clothing. So yeah. Oh yeah, if you went to a paper making village, yeah. So here's the thing, if you go to Korea and you go to a traditional, say, indigo dyeing village, and you go to the local museum, there's going to be a great exhibit about indigo dyeing, but these artists and artisans are actually trying to remake themselves into artists by using these traditional crafts to basically create objet d'art, to create an applied art. And so they're doing the traditional indigo dyeing techniques, and they're dyeing traditional fabric, but then they're turning that fabric into very modern things, right? Or very avant-garde things, even completely new things, in fact, in some cases. So yeah, Korea is trying to, successfully, I would say, to combine historic and traditional techniques. When does traditional stop and historic begin? These traditional and or historic techniques, and they're trying to update them and make them relevant to the modern world by making modern things out of them and not just traditional things. So yeah, just because you see it at a traditional paper making village doesn't mean it's historic. In fact, it's less likely to be historic, ironically. Yeah. Yep. Just found some adjustments that need to be made to my scapular. The forever adjustments. Yeah, I don't know if I've ever made a garment ever that didn't have adjustments after it was made. And actually, having now had multiple garments custom made for Ryan, for myself, mostly not historic, mostly modern garments and hanbok. Now that I've had multiple garments made, there has never, ever, ever, ever been a time when one of those custom made garments did not have to be adjusted after it was made, after it was finished. And sometimes even after it was finished and then I wore it for a week or two and realized, oh no, this is not working. So I don't feel so badly that my own creations nearly always need post-factum adjustments. It's the nature of custom made items. And the reality is that if we could all afford it, think about this. When you buy clothing off of the rack these days, it doesn't fit you perfectly, especially if it's fitted, right? If it's loose, then you probably don't notice that doesn't really fit you. But if it's a garment that's actually fitted, it doesn't fit you perfectly. So what do? We add a belt to it to make the waist small enough while it still fits our chest, for instance. Or we just get used to being slightly uncomfortable in our clothing, or we wear a shirt that's long enough, a blouse or a top that's long enough to cover the way the pants don't quite sit around our hips properly, right? We gaslight ourselves into thinking it's okay. But the reality is that honestly, if you buy a piece of a garment from off the rack, if you really want it and it's fitted and you really want it to fit you properly, you probably should be taking it to a tailor or to a sewist for alterations, right? Yeah. Yep. Okay. I would like to thank all of my patrons and my channel members and my Facebook members for supporting my work. I would like to thank you all for participating in this live stream and asking the good questions and making good comments and sharing good information and just being engaging, and also for laughing at my witticisms. If you're just discovering my channel, and especially if you're coming from Facebook, you might want to check out my YouTube channel. I have so many really carefully researched, carefully edited, scripted, and produced videos on a variety of topics about medieval material culture that I think you will find interesting. My most recent one is about medieval rings. I would like to thank one of my primary channel sponsor, Armor and Castings. Their beautiful pieces have been adorning my body for a while, and I've got new demescent belt sets on their way. We're going to be making some very beautiful new hip belt bling from some of their beautiful demescent pieces. Contessa 10 if you want to purchase one of their gorgeous pieces, and then you get a 10% discount. And they know that, you know, I'm actually sending people their direction, and they'll keep sending me beautiful bling. Yeah. Final comments. I have a cotton shirt and pants. I have a cotton shirt and pants in Thailand. I still have them. I want to copy and pattern and make a couple of more sets. Yeah, I mean, fisherman pants are really forgiving and can be mass produced, right? That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about like a fitted suit. If you buy a fitted suit off of the rack, most likely you're going to have adjustments made in order to fit it. I'm YouTube only, gave up Facebook and IG. I feel like I'm in recovery. Oh, Tomacor, I envy you. I envy you so much. Look, I envy you. Yeah, that sounds like a beautiful existence. Okay, well, tomorrow we will be having our medieval cooking party at about the same time as today. So join us then as we explore one or maybe two original medieval recipes and recreate it together using a combination of medieval equipment, as much as I have here available, which isn't much, and of course, modern equipment. So this is something you could reasonably do in your own kitchen. So until next time, everyone, if you had any questions and I didn't answer them, it's not because I was ignoring you, it's probably because I missed it. Pop it in the comments and I will go ahead and give it an answer. Okay, everyone, until next time, or hopefully tomorrow, may your historical explorations be creative. Bye, everyone.